Christoph from Belgium. Am I wrong to think that WrestleMania is beginning to lose its prestige? It occurred to me that I haven't been impressed with WrestleMania for many years now. No matches really have the build-up they once used to have, and the end result is equally unimpressive, AJ versus Nakamura being a prime example. All the manias from the Hogan, Bret, Austin, and yes, even John Cena era had tremendous build-ups and instant classic matches, the likes of which we have not seen since Shawn Michaels battled The Undertaker. Is this just WWE's booking declining over the years, or the effect of Vince McMahon not prioritizing WrestleMania like he once used to? It's hard to say that they don't prioritize WrestleMania because they really do kind of build everything around it, and it just gets more grandiose in terms of the staging. They have a whole bidding process now that didn't exist back in the Hogan era and the Austin era, where cities have to bid on WrestleMania like it's the frickin' Olympics. And so I think to say that WrestleMania has lost its prestige is not entirely true. I think you're talking about it more from an in-ring perspective. So you're talking about the matches, in terms of the actual cards and feuds and matches, blow-offs to certain things, that WrestleMania really has not had very many of those in recent years. I would agree with you. Every year WrestleMania should have at least that one classic match that climaxes a big feud and has some of the best matches all year. You can hold those matches up against any other promotion, New Japan, and WrestleMania should be held to a higher standard because it is a bigger show, and I agree. I think a lot of times in recent years, this year is a great example of it. I really thought the Ronda Rousey stuff was great, but aside from that, WrestleMania this year, match-wise, was mostly a huge misfire, at least as far as the big championship matches and all that. And I do agree with you. We've seen a lot of that, unfortunately, in recent years. We saw it last year in Orlando with Roman and The Undertaker. We saw it at WrestleMania 32 in Dallas. And, and I don't, I think a lot of the reason WrestleMania maybe doesn't also feel as big to you and other people as it did back then. First of all, we were kids. We were a lot younger, and just our perspective is different. When you get older and the more wrestling you watch and you have kids of your own, you just look at things differently. And I think that has to be taken into account. But I also think it just has to do with the nature of television now and the increase in the amount of weekly content that there is. My God, it's like there's a show every week for WWE now. And not only are there shows almost every day of the week, but they supersize everything. So WrestleMania was always a big show, but now WrestleMania is double the length and double the size of what it used to be. And that doesn't even take into account other shows that they do. In the same month, we had another pay-per-view that was also 6 hours long. All the other quote-unquote big shows, Royal Rumble and all that, between the pre-shows and the show itself, is 4 or 5 hours long. So they supersize everything. WrestleMania, in that way, doesn't really stand out as much. And I agree with you. I think it does take away from WrestleMania because you're comparing the Hogan era and the Austin era. Back then, you had the supposed Big Four, Big Five, and you go back to the Hogan era. That was just a completely different world, right? You barely saw big stars on Superstars and Wrestling Challenge. You didn't see the same faces every week. You had months and months between pay-per-views, and a lot of the pay-per-views looked the same. WrestleMania sometimes looked different just because they were running a bigger building, a dome, and so it really felt like, wow, this is a special show. We've got 60,000 people here. It's a dome. You can see a light outside. So WrestleMania felt unique. And they still go out of their way to put together the fancy set and everything. And I still maintain that the roller coaster set in Orlando that they supposedly spent $5 million making is the greatest set that they've ever created. And just being there in person, I could tell you that thing was just, it's just majestic to see that thing in person. So when they want to and they spend the money, believe me, this is a company that can go all out. But I agree with you. I think WrestleMania has lost some of its luster. And I think that more often than not, we find that these big matches that are promoted for WrestleMania, they don't really deliver as much as they should. And sometimes they come back on the back end with a rematch a month or two later, and that turns out to be better than the WrestleMania match. And it probably shouldn't be that way.